Okay, this week we're going to do two different lessons about solving equations with fractions. Today's is what happens if you have an equation where you're trying to solve it and you have to either add or subtract a fraction. And we're going to solve it just like we would if it wasn't involving a fraction. And then we're just going to apply all the fraction rules that we've learned, for years and years to solve them. So let's look at letter A. So hopefully what we reviewed last week and what you're remembering is if I'm trying to get x by itself, and this is x minus a half, I have to do the opposite to both sides, which is add a half. So if I add a half over here, that means I have to add a half over here. So now what we're left with is x equals 4 1/3 plus a half. Okay, and some of you guys are like, oh, sweet, that's easy. Okay, and some of y'all are like, I have no clue what to do next, which is fine. Okay, what we're gonna do when you're adding and subtracting fractions, they have to have a common denominator. So the common denominator between 3 and 2 would be 6. So I'm gonna take this fraction right here and multiply it by 2. I'm gonna take this fraction right here and multiply it by 3. Okay, and I'll show you why. So now we have x equals 4 and 2/6 plus 3/6. Okay, so my whole number stays the same, it's just 4. But then what's 2/6? 2/6, 6 is my hardest word to say, plus 3/6 would be 5/6. And that would be my answer. Okay, and this I think is as hard as it's gonna get as far as the fraction part goes today. So let's look at letter B. So hopefully, again, we're like, oh, this is adding 4/5. The opposite would be to subtract 4/5. So now I'm left with y equals 1/2 minus 4/5. So what would be a common denominator between 2 and 5? 10, right? So to make this into a 10, I'm gonna multiply by 5. To make this 5 into a 10, I'm gonna multiply it by 2. And I'm multiplying the numerator and the denominator of the fraction. So I get y equals 5/10 minus 8/10. And then you might be thinking, well, how can I do that? Because this one is less. Well, all that means is that we're going to use our integer rules. 5 minus 8 is -3/10. Can I simplify that? Nope, they're not divisible by anything the same. So that is my answer. Look at C. So the opposite of subtracting 4.5, I'm going to add 4.5. Okay, let's use our common sense. Let's look at it. If you have 5 cookies and I give you 4.5, how many do you have? 9.5, right? No common denominators, nothing like that. We just added together the whole numbers. Letter D, and if you want, this would be a good spot where you could pause it and try the next 3 and then come back and check. Okay, so the opposite of adding 2/3 is to subtract 2/3. And then what would be a common denominator between 6 and 3? 6. So I'm gonna multiply both parts of this fraction by 2. So that's gonna leave me with y equals 5/6 minus 4/6. Well, 5 minus 4 is 1/6. Okay, and that's it. And it makes sense because if I plug that in here, that would be 1/6. 2/3 is the same as 4/6. So 1/6 plus 4/6 is 5/6. Okay, letter E. So the opposite of subtracting 1/4 is adding 1/4. And then what would be a common denominator between 7 and 4? It would be 28. So I would multiply this fraction by 4, right, times 4. So I would get 12/28. And then this one I would multiply by 7 to get 7/28. So when you add those together, you get 19/28. And if we plugged it back in, 19/28 minus 7/28 is 12/28, which they're both divisible by 4, is 3/7. Okay, and then the last one, I have C plus an eighth equals 2 over 5. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 1 over 8 from both sides. So I have C equals 2/5 minus 1/8. Okay, and I have enough room so I can kind of explain it a little bit better. So again, the common denominator between 5 and 8 is going to be 40. So I'm going to multiply this one by 8 over 8, and I'm going to multiply this side by 5 over 5. So let's look at it. What's 8 divided by 8? It's 1, right? And any number times 1 stays the number. So I'm not changing my fraction. I'm just writing it in an equivalent form. So I get C equals 16 over 40 minus 5 over 40. So 5 over 40 and 1/8 are the exact same amount. Okay, all we're doing is writing it in a different way so that these two have a denominator that matches. So now 16 minus 5 is 11 over 40. This is in simplest form, and so that's my answer. And so your homework today is a Google form, and it's multiple choice, so just do your work on a separate sheet of paper. If you get an answer that isn't an answer choice, then that means that you probably should go back and rework that problem. And if you have questions on it, email me and I can help you walk through it if you can't figure it out.